Welcome to the Culture Lab. I'm your host, Bajer. This podcast helps you turn your company culture into rocket fuel for meaningful growth. It explores how we can make the word work synonymous with fun, meaning, and belonging. It looks at how we can build remarkable cultures that scale as our businesses grow and the world keeps on changing.
Innovation is new ideas made useful. Innovation is practical creativity, but where does that come from? Well, the first place it comes from is some kind of insight. You have to have an insight into a problem, or you have to have an insight into a solution. You have to notice something. So that form of creativity, actually everybody listening to this will have some kind of valuable insight, perhaps even a unique insight, because only you are you. I don't mean to be cheesy, but factually, only you are you, and you have your experiences. And if you pay attention to them, you will see something that needs solving. You'll see something that seems incomplete, or you'll see an attractive idea, a possibility, something that works elsewhere, and you will take that into your world and solve a problem with it.
Hey everyone! I hope that you are having a blast wherever you are. For us over here in Europe, it's the summer season and the weather is pretty amazing. But actually, it's been quite busy. Last week, I traveled to Thessaloniki and I did a keynote for Pfizer at their Global Center for Digital Innovation. And I talked about innovation culture and the importance of deep fun at work. And then I realized that we have a conversation that we recorded a while ago with Max Mckeown that is so incredibly relevant to this topic. So Max is a brilliant author and a speaker. And in this episode from our archives, we do a deep dive into the power of culture to drive innovation, but also into the importance of finding a way for culture and strategy to support each other. So I hope you enjoy it. And one more thing, my team told me that I should be more active on Twitter. And when my team tells me something, I try to listen. So please follow me on Twitter. My handle is Coach Aga. And I really look forward to having some interesting conversations with you over there. So yeah, see you on Twitter and enjoy the episode. Max, welcome to the Culture Lab.
Lovely to be here. Lovely to be with you. And on your perfect Culture Lab, I mean, I'm looking around and you've got like machines and you've got gizmos and experiments going on. Yeah, good to be in the Culture Lab.
Exactly. Just look around. It's impressive, isn't it?
It is. It's one of the most impressive Culture Labs I have ever been in.
How many have you been to?
Well, I suppose in a sense, everything is a Culture Lab. Things are bubbling, things are being connected, human tissue and thoughts. But this seems very deliberate, your Culture Lab. You've made it, beautiful, expensive, very, very impressive. I'm enjoying it.
Thank you. So make yourself comfortable.
I will. I'll sit down here.
So just to help our listeners understand who you are and what you do, could you give us a brief introduction?
Well, my name's Max Mckeown, Dr. Max Mckeown. I am really interested in how humans shape their futures, either deliberately or accidentally. And that has led me to a number of academic pursuits, psychology and strategy and innovation, and then writing, and then dealing in the real world. That's it. And I do that in a very visual way, typically with groups of people drawing and cartooning and bringing their ideas back in. So I like to make, I guess, magic potions, perfect recipes of ideas with the audience and myself, and then the ideas that I have consumed from elsewhere.
I love it. It's really impressive. And for those of our listeners who are not familiar with what you do, I'd really encourage people to go online and check some of those videos out to see the magic potions being made. It's really, really impressive. So, Dr. Max Mckeown, I understand now why you would appreciate our scientific lab here, because you've done a lot of research yourself. And I want us to dive into that in a moment, because a lot of your work, as you said, is basically at the intersection of strategy, innovation, and culture. But before we go there is one question I always ask at the very start of each interview, which is, what were the early cultural influences that shaped you as a person?
Great question. Well, I was a child of many parts, just like my magic potions and your culture lab. I was born in Whittington Hospital in London, in a vibrant cosmopolitan city, but also a particularly vibrant and diverse and exciting area of London in Haringey. So I was surrounded by it. My primary school we had over 100 different nationalities there, all in London together. And those were my friends and influences. And then I was also a Sesame Street child, watching that kind of television coming over from America. And my grandfather, who lived in New York, was a magician and an artist, and he was married to an artist and a puppeteer. So we just had ideas, flooding, and that mix of science and experimentation. I was the kid who was taking apart machines and cutting them up and putting them back together and experimenting and giving my brother crazy jobs to do. I'd tell him what to cut in the house, and I'd be 3 and he'd be 2, and I'd say, hey, it had nothing to do with me. And I was the kid who would throw himself out.
2 and 3-year-old kids with scissors.
Well, I could read and walk very early. I taught my brother to kind of read. When I was 2, I was teaching it. I was going, hey, these are the words. And I was throwing myself out of my cot at 6 months, throwing myself out of the cot and wandering around. So, yeah, I had a lot of cultural influences from other places and from my own family, ideas. It was a rich environment to become an adult eventually.
Yeah, it sounds, yes, this word vibrant. I think it sounds like a common theme in your life, and there seems to be so much energy in your early background. And so I can see potentially where your creativity comes from, because you really do strike me as a very creative person. So whereas I certainly want us to talk about strategy and culture, I think one of the first things that I would like to ask you is, have you always been so creative, and have you continued? Because it sounds like from the age of 2 and 3, you certainly started being creative. So have you always been like that throughout your whole life? Is my first question.
I really suspect the answer is yes. The research suggests that our first dreaming takes place in the womb. In the 3rd trimester, we're already dreaming. And I think I was there dreaming away. And the research also tells us that, we are creative in different ways. And one of the ways in which we are creative is our degree of openness to experience and I suppose random creativity, where you're thrown an idea, but the idea you throw back is not necessarily what would be expected. You go left and other people would go right. All of those aspects of creativity were in there early drawing, playing with ideas, going left rather than right, surprising people, not deliberately, just I don't view myself as a different person, but the response from the world suggests that perhaps I am.
Yes, and so it seems like from the early childhood, your parents and your environment supported that behavior. And so some of our listeners might be thinking, yeah, so for you, it's easy, it comes naturally. And I'm sure that a lot of people who listen would like to know, how can people have better ideas? How do you come up with a big idea, an idea that has potential to really make a dent in the world? Can you speak to that a little bit?
I mean, they're great questions. I think that where we need to pull back slightly is just to make sure that we know, and your audience knows, what kind of definitions we're working with for creativity and for innovation. So for me, innovation is about making new ideas useful. It's a form of practical creativity. So you're moving from an insight and you're moving from an insight to an idea. And insights can come in a couple of forms, really: problem insights and solution insights. I mean, there are other forms, but those are the first couple. So somebody can notice, anybody listening to this can have noticed a problem, and probably a number of times a day, you will notice something that you think can be improved or something you don't like. It might annoy you, it might frustrate you, or you might just notice in somebody else's life, oh, that could be done better. But you may not necessarily know how at this point. Or alternatively, you might find some idea that looks cool. It's a new device, a mobile phone, an app, a technology, a scientific paper, something that you see on the television that somebody's doing. And you think, oh, that's really interesting. I like that tool. I like that mechanism. And it's a form of solution insight. But you might not have a problem to use it to solve yet. And it's when you bring those two things together, the solution insight and the problem insight, that you have the very first beginnings of an idea, and you've started on the path potentially to innovation, an idea made useful.
So just trying to pick what you have shared with us apart for our listeners to be able to process that. So the first thing that you're saying is important to do is start noticing. And I understand that there is a certain level of self-awareness that you need to have, that you are actually noticing something and having an insight, because I think what happens to us very often in life is that those are really fleeting moments. And as you say, you might feel frustrated, but then you just forget about it, and it's lost. So, and you say that there are two different kinds of insights, solution insight and a problem insight, and they need to come together. So a follow-up question on that is, how do you keep track of those insights so that, as I said before, they don't just disappear?
They just don't disappear. Yeah, you don't want to lose them if they were vital. Or if they were maybe not vital, just valuable. I suppose there's a range of ways that I've seen. So some people just keep a notebook and they jot those ideas. Some people jot them down on a Post-it or a poster or a whiteboard, just so that they exist. So some people write them as a little blog post or something so that they can initially start it or share it with a colleague. I suppose there's a Google that they keep a kind of database of every idea that is attempted, so that, or every idea that is considered, so that if anybody else comes back to an idea, they can find what's been done so far. Toyota do something similar when they require that every employee come up with a suggestion and try to put it into action. They keep a record of all of those so that those people and their supervisors can look and see who has done it in the past, not to avoid trying it again, but so that they try it again with the benefit of whatever the initial experience was. So I suppose you act more like a scientist or an artist. Both of these are creative people, and they're professional creative people. So an artist will keep a book of inspirations, sketches, pieces of cloth, other people's work. They keep that notebook. That's what you're taught to do as an artist. And as a scientist, you're also taught to keep a notebook, and you're taught to write every day. You've probably seen this in some Hollywood movie, some crazy scientist,
Sure.
And The Fly comes to mind, a horror movie, and they're writing down, on this day, this is the experiment that I did, these were the results, this was the fleeting thought that I'd had, so that you can go back and remember whatever it was that you did. So I think whether you think like a scientist or you think like an artist, you can do something with your idea. And that's even if you've only got one idea, like the guy who burnt his hands on the coffee cup and then wrapped a piece of cardboard around it and eventually invented the cup holder, and he's made millions from it, and that's his only idea. He had one insight, it's a problem, then one idea, it's a solution insight. He jammed them together and he experimented with a few different prototypes. He wasn't an engineer. And then he got them made, and then he sold them. And people have asked him, have you got any other ideas? And he said, no, I haven't had any. I haven't had any at all. I'm just going to ride to the end of the line with this. And we might make, So I'm not saying to people who are listening that you have to have billions of ideas, but if you record, a few a bit and then start to experiment with the ones that seem a little bit valuable just in the roughest way, then you can move those ideas from insights to ideas and then start nurturing them, which I'm sure we'll talk about at some point. Because once it's become an idea, it's still not perfect, it's still not finished, and then you have to learn how to nurture.
Absolutely. And you use this analogy in your book, The Innovator's Book, that an idea at the very beginning is like a baby. So it really needs to be nurtured and protected. And the whole point is to really strengthen it so much that it becomes an idea shark. So would you be able to talk to our listeners a little bit about that? And, when you have this idea, which is still a baby, very helpless and needs your nurturing, how do you do that? How do you nurture an idea? And also, how do you know that this is the idea that you should be investing in?
Well, that's always a challenge. But definitely, new ideas are like babies. I say beautiful, ugly, and not finished yet. Because they might be beautiful to you. I mean, usually, if it has caught your attention, it is of interest to you. And so we could argue that it was beautiful. But when you explain it to other people, it's kind of ugly and it's unfinished, and you don't really recognize the value in it. Like the guy with his piece of card. If he'd only shared that, maybe other people wouldn't have got it, but he built it to at least a prototype, and then everybody could see his point. And the more original idea is, often the harder it is to get it across to somebody else. So you do need a way of making it easy to swallow, making it easy to understand, having a story wrapped around it. I mean, you remember the Netflix story. You remember that?
Yes.
And so the story that's always told is that he was renting a VHS cassette, and when he got back to Blockbusters, they gave him a fine, and he didn't like having his fine, so he started his own company. That used to be the story. But as far as his co-founder is concerned, that never happened. So what we have there is them taking an idea and wrapping a story around it that makes it easy for people to understand. And so sometimes when your idea is kind of ugly to other people, you need to find a story and a way of presenting it to other people, wrapping it up, bathing it, making it look beautiful, putting a bow in its hair, whatever, so that people get it. And then it's easier to swallow. But you equally, as an innovator, you're always trying to do sort of these three jobs. You're trying to make the idea useful in itself, take it from that insight to something that genuinely does a useful job. And then you have to wrap other people around it. You have to make it popular. And then you have to help it to win. And so ideas really do make this, they travel from being just things in our heads or half-finished prototypes to becoming stronger and stronger and stronger. And that's where this sort of strategy it comes in, and we'll move towards that. But in answer to part of your question, creativity isn't an accident. So what you really have to do is gather together ideas and facts, play with them, find connections, squash them, rearrange them, remix them, and then allow your subconscious to really make a great big idea from all those ideas. And then it will appear that it's arrived from nowhere, but you know that this is a much better idea than you had before. And then you're able to go to work and start to get your hands dirty. And it progresses all the way then from that baby idea that came from nowhere to something that is able to compete in the world, to survive and find a place.
Yeah, that's fascinating. I'm also curious, what's your personal process for collecting and evaluating and nurturing your own ideas? Do you have one? Do you have a process?
I suppose I do. I mean, I've said elsewhere that the true parents of innovation are creativity and necessity, or curiosity and necessity, rather. And I'm a very curious person, so I am constantly, if I watch a movie, I want to find out who wrote the movie and how much did it make, and what was the budget, and what was the backstory, and how long did the script take to come to fruition, and was it viewed as a success, and did the casting change or not change, what led to that position. So one of the beauties of curiosity, if it's natural, is that it's a proper resource. It's an energy that drives you forward to understand how things are made, to unmake them, and then you're capable of remaking them because you understand how they were made in the first place. So I let my curiosity go. And then what I'm doing in addition is trying to sort from all the things that I have discovered into principles and then pull them together visually and then go forward in the form of a book or a presentation or a business idea. And that's a process that really works with clients, whether they're pharmaceuticals or high tech or retail or manufacturing. You take all of those ideas and you pull them into a picture and you say, this is where we are and this is where we'd like to go to. And I paint it the same kind of conceptual picture of we want to move from this island to this island to this island, and here are the waves. And by making that come to life, even in my own work, you're able to go from lots of creative ideas and sort them through a funnel to something that you want to achieve. So you have to blend really strategy, where you want to go, with curiosity, just stuff that you found out. Yes. And if you find out enough stuff, but you keep bearing in mind where you want to go, then you get to use what you have discovered and put it to work. If you're just curious, then that can be beautiful in itself. But if you want to get somewhere, if you need to earn a living or you want to change the world in some small or big way, you have to be strategic at the same time. You have to keep bearing in mind an end point or end points, somewhere you want to go, and say, look, this is what we've discovered. This is what we already have. Let's put them together. We need to make a bit more progress on this. We need to put that idea down. This one's working. This one isn't. It is a blend. And that's why, of course, innovation and culture are art and science. Yeah. They're art and science in part because they're too complex for us to fully comprehend. So we have to just make our way artistically towards our objective.
So I want us to talk a little bit about strategy, because it's certainly, one of the most important disciplines probably when it comes to shaping the future and bringing ideas to life. So first I want to ask, how do you define strategy?
Okay, well, strategy is about shaping the future, as we said. That's its purpose. And really, it's a modern word for describing a quite ancient human ability. We gained that ability maybe 70,000 years ago, properly, this advanced ability to consider our past and our desires for the future and deliberately shape what we do today. So innovation is about shaping the future. It's about using what you have from where you are to move to where you want to go. Innovation, smart innovation, is the shortest route to desirable ends with available means.
So here's what I'm curious about. I think strategy has long been the domain of careful deliberation, and people felt like they have to have a maximum amount of information to be able to devise a strategy, know how to get where they want to get. But it seems that this model is no longer fit for our VUCA world. So what are your thoughts on this?
Well, first, I don't think it ever was, really. Only when things are certain and simple can your strategy be certain and simple, and you could really know everything there is to know about it. The thing about most strategy is that we're either trying to do something new to us or new to the world, or we're trying to do something competitively. And in both those situations, you can't know everything. And so you have to be willing to adjust something daily. And that's why in the strategy book, I introduced a new tool, the Quick Start Strategy Canvas, to allow people to ask the big 5 questions about strategy and keep asking them every day. So there's a wall chart version. Yeah. And you can have it, giant wall chart. And what you're saying all the time is, okay, so where do I want to go, more or less? And you just write a couple of words in there, because you kind of know it might be I want to earn a living and I don't want to have to work for a corporate, or it might be I want a promotion, for personally, or it might be for your business, I want to get rid of plastic. You could start quite vague and high, but you move from that where you want to go back to where we are right now. And then you flip back to what we need to do now and how do we need to do it and how to measure our progress, those big 5 questions. And then you consider what's pushing you and what's stopping you. And but you have to do that. You have to at least have that in your head almost all the time. And with your group or your team, you have to come back frequently to say, why are we doing this? How are we doing this? Is this, however beautiful our strategy document, have we stopped to consider the results? Is it going? I read an example recently about how during the First World War, apparently the build-up to it, apparently the Kaiser of Germany learned that Britain would stay out of the war as long as Germany would only attack one of France or Russia. And he said to his general, could we do that then? Could we just stop our men? And the general says, no, we've started, so we've got to finish. And I think about, well, what? Why would you want to, just because you started a war, you have to continue a war? And I think people they can be like that. They say it's sunk cost bias. They say that because and the more energy I've put into the plan, the more I have to follow the plan, even if the plan no longer works. And even if the plan was based on insufficient information, which is, I have to emphasize to your listeners, is all plans.
This one is really interesting to explore, though, because I think a lot of us fall prey to this cost bias because, it's hard. I have personal experiences where when I invested a lot of time and sometimes money in a project and it seems like it's not working out, but you feel like, maybe if I only try something different, it will eventually work. And so I guess my question is, how do you know that you really have to cut yourself off and just, get moving forward, because the plan wasn't great. It's clearly not working, because sometimes, there's this tipping point, and beyond the tipping point, things start working. So I think it's a big dilemma, isn't it?
It can be. I mean, I know that you're friends with and a fan of Seth Godin's work. And I remember him writing a very short book called The Dip. And it was a great promise. Well, in effect, he had found a problem. And he said, yes, how do you know? How do you know when things are not going right, whether to continue to success or to stop? But unfortunately, in the book, he doesn't answer his own question at all. I mean, not at all.
I think this is Seth's style. He just likes to make you think about problems and identify your own solutions, but he's very rarely prescriptive. Yeah.
They're not really how to. They're Houston, you've got a problem books.
Yeah.
So it's not critical of all his books, but in this case, I think the answer in a way is, of course, you don't know. Strategy is in many ways a hypothesis. There are different ways, I think I should point out to your listeners again, there are different ways of living or proceeding with life. You can live by habit. That's traditions. That's what you've always done. That's just the way you are. You can live by habit. You can live by heuristics. They're rules of thumb, sort of principles that might come to mind, that it's two in the hand are worth, one in the hand are worth two in the bush, or something, some heuristics, some principle for working.
You can't have a cake and eat it.
And eat it. Well, yeah, teach that to Britain at the moment. See if you can. But the third really is to live by hypothesis, is to deliberately live that way. Now, that doesn't guarantee that you will be more successful. I mean, we know that the most useful tool in success is luck. It's just, if you could have the fates on your side, if you could always be lucky, then you don't need a plan, do you? You don't need a strategy. Just luck. Be born in the right place, to the right family at the right time, with the right opportunities. You could be born rich, and you wouldn't have to work for it. But we have to put, therefore, luck out of the way and say, do you want to live by habit and get what you're going to get in an unthinking way? Are you going to live by heuristic with a few principles? Well, that's better. Are you going to live by hypothesis, to say, this is my theory at the moment. That's why I favor graphical things and this quick start strategy canvas as an example of that. Because you say, look, where do we want to go? How do I measure my progress? I thought I should measure my progress by this. It turns out that on that measure, I'm not making any progress, but my hypothesis said I should have. There must be something with your hypothesis, right? There must be something. And living like that and proceeding like that is how really most of the, if not all of the great innovators and strategists have been successful. I mean, really, the ultra innovator is the uber strategist. The uber innovator is the ultra strategist, because what they're trying to do is say, it's continually check. That's what Bezos did. It took him years. His basic idea was, this internet thing's going to be a good way of selling stuff. That's the hypothesis. But he had to go further than that to figure out how to make selling stuff over the internet profitable. And he had to he stole an idea from Costco, and the idea of having a membership fee, which became Amazon Prime. He stole that after a visit to Costco, and he took another idea from somewhere, and he built a growth engine for his company with about 5 components. It took him a long time, and he's still working at it, his hypothesis, his theory of success. So I would suggest that doing things in isolation isn't enough. You have to say, look, I think doing a podcast is a good idea. I think writing a book is a good idea for this reason. And make an active choice around that and say, I have decided to do it for this reason. I make an active choice on that basis. I have done it in the following way, so I can know that I did it the way I wanted to. It is either achieving what I want, or it is not, or a bit of what I want, or it isn't. Do I need to revise my hypothesis?
Totally. And what am I learning through this process?
And what am I learning? Just like a scientist. Yeah. No, go.
Yeah, I love that. I really love this idea of living by hypotheses, and it's a little bit mind bending. Sorry, for me. when I put culture into this. So I want to just play with you with these notions, because you say you can either live by habit or by heuristics or by hypotheses. Where does culture sit in relation to those three things?
Well, very much. You perhaps wouldn't be surprised to hear very much in all of those. So if we go back to culture being maybe the sum total of the values and the beliefs and the assumptions and the traditions of an organization, it's all of us. Culture is a human system or human systems. It's the combination of all of us. It has our nature and our natures, so multiple and combined. So in a culture, if we draw some lines around it and we say an organizational culture, the culture of IBM, the way that things are done around there and the way that they think, all of that combination. Well, so you've got everybody's habits, everybody's heuristics, and everybody's hypotheses. So at the level at which the culture shapes behavior, and that's why we're interested in it, what it's like to be there, how people act and how people react. At that level, it's the combination of all of those individual hypotheses, heuristics, and hypotheses and habits, and the organizational habits and heuristics and hypotheses, which are not the same as the individual at all. For instance, there'll be hypotheses that are written in the company report and that will be written in the value statement and will be written in the role statement. These are what we say formally, but then there'll also just be the habits, the way things are done really. You join an organization and at first you don't know what's going on, and you joined for this reason because of, salary and potential and because it would be cool or whatever, because you'd have a great office or a car. And then you get into it, and at first nobody really listens to your opinion, even though you've got new things to stay. But if you stay for maybe a year or two, you'll learn how things really work and you'll gain a bit of influence. But the problem is you've got nothing new to say. And so you've got this constant flow between things, the way things are said to work and the way they don't work. So I suppose at one level, it's those three things are happening all of the time. Mm-hmm. And then at a different way of answering that question, perhaps, is if you sought to change a culture, you could do it in one of those three ways, by habit, heuristic, or by hypothesis. So you could say, I think culture should be like this. That's the habit. That's always the way we've done it, and we need to have a strong culture the way that we've always done it. Or you could have a hypothesis approach to culture and say, this is our strategic approach. This is what we want. What kind of culture do we need in order to better achieve that goal? And how do we alter it? Again, do we alter it doing the same things we've always done, or do we alter it by hypothesis? We try this intervention and we look at the results and we say, well, I don't know if that did work. We've always done it, but it didn't work. So let's try something else and let's do it, semi-scientifically. So everywhere.
Yeah. So I love that. I think it's so complex that it's very difficult to give a straightforward answer to some of these questions, but it's really interesting to explore.
Sounds like that's a different way of saying that. Yeah, well, that wasn't that clear.
No, I don't mean that it wasn't clear, but it's really difficult to simplify it to just, do this or do that, or it's this or it's that, because it really does depend. In the strategy book, by the way, you say something that create a sort of a mental image in my mind when it comes to culture. So I want us to play with this a little bit if you are in the mood to play. And it is a culture lab, so we're sort of allowed to experiment with
I'm a very playful person, so yeah, totally.
Yeah. So you have this thing where you say strategy and culture should eat breakfast together, and of course you allude to culture eats strategy for breakfast, attributed to Drucker, and we'll get there perhaps. But first, I want us to play with that. So when I read this, it brought an image to my mind, and it was almost like a part of a comic strip. So I saw strategy sitting at the breakfast table in its underpants, missing, the usual tie and suit, and still groggy from sleep. And then there was culture, not very well put together either, maybe with some smeared mascara around the eyes and hair tousled, and they both looked like they needed coffee desperately. So if we were creating a comic strip right now together, where would you go with this? What would be, if this is the first vignette in the strip, what would be the next one?
That's fascinating. I suppose because I will do the next step, but there are so many different ways those two could sit down and eat breakfast together. I was imagining, that sometimes strategy could be sitting down thinking it has all the answers, and being very, I already know what I want to eat, and culture sits down saying, checking out everything on the menu to make sure that, so let's have a little bit of everything, and let's have a lovely, relaxed morning, and culture saying, hey, I need my coffee and I got to get out of here. So I could start to imagine them as different personalities, sometimes in organizations represented by the hard side of the business. I guess sales is probably the hardest side of the business, and manufacturing, that side. And then culture is often represented pictorially by the human resources and by the marketing, the way we are, and there's a different aesthetic, and it's a bit softer, and it uses more Post-it notes. And so I'm adding to it, I suppose. I'm imagining the colors that the stereotypical strategy and culture would have as they sat down. But what would they do together? I guess they'd start talking like we're talking. And they'd maybe find something in common. And they'd say maybe coffee's in common, and the waiter, the server comes over. I have a favorite diner in Boston, and the server comes over and pours you a big coffee, and we've got that in common now. We're both that far we've come, and then we open our eyes a little bit to each other and look at what we're going to order. And you start to think, well, we both want eggs, and maybe I'll have what you're having. And if we open our eyes to each other a little bit as the coffee's waking us up, I guess my vignette goes to that, to coffee, to opening our eyes a little, and then seeing what we've got in common as we look around the rest of the diner at the cop and his friend on the beat, and the SWAT team who are here, and the little family who brought their grandchildren for breakfast. And we look up, rather than eating alone, we're meant to be eating together. Yeah, it's fascinating because there are so many directions that you can go with that. But, going back a little bit to a little bit more seriousness, I feel that breakfast is different from all other meals, like brunch, lunch, or dinner, because it feels most intimate, doesn't it? Because we eat breakfast usually either with our family or with our partners or lovers. And I'm curious breakfast in bed
about your take.
Absolutely.
Could be breakfast, right? So what needs to happen for strategy and culture to even have breakfast together in the first place? Because we assume that they will be willing to sit down together and start finding these common areas, the fact that they like coffee and that they both want eggs. But is there something that needs to precede that to bring them to that level of intimacy where they can have this conversation?
Well, I think that the very most successful examples of these are organizations where strategy and culture sat down for breakfast, often before the organization is even formed. Hewlett-Packard, they had a way they wanted to do business. Toyota, they had a way they wanted to. It wasn't perfect, but they had a way. And so right from the start, they didn't they understood ends and means, those components, that strategy is a means to getting to an end. And they understood that the way people work with. So I think that it is intimate, but if you consider strategy and culture as part of a family, and we haven't got separate dates, we've booked this breakfast together, or it's at home, wherever it is, and we're saying, hey, first thing to do, we need to get together, don't we? You know, we're the first people we want to see, so that it's not culture as a document, and it's not strategy as a document. I mean, who would want to have breakfast with someone who just sent, a script instead of going, or do or a text breakfast? I mean, I suppose that could go somewhere in your vignette, but that's not the purpose of the show. Yeah. But so I suppose if we want to be really practical, understanding that strategy and culture need to work together, they have to have breakfast together, but that they're not the same thing. That I recognize what strategy recognizes strategy for what strategy is, and culture recognizes culture for what culture is, and they recognize each other. So too many people, I think, confuse them or think they're competitive. When you know that culture is about the personalities and behaviors of a social group, all those billion different ways that people can work together and think together, and that strategy is about shaping the future, then you say, well, what kind of culture really do we want in order to achieve our objective? Do we want the radical candor that some are arguing for? Do we want the heartfelt stuff that Southwest talk about? I mean, how different is that? Southwest want people to do what makes heart sense. They want them to really love customers and feel that the rules should be changed as and when to suit the situation for the customer's good. And they also believe there that everybody's on the same side, customer, employee, owners, managers. We're on the same team. That's the culture they need, because that's what their strategy requires. If you're an Elon Musk, you want a culture that is totally getting rid of the crap, that doesn't waste any time because you are against the clock. You're in a race against possibility and competitors. You got it, and investors, they're breathing down your neck. So you want to go no posturing, no hierarchy. Which idea works? Let's get it going. Figure out a way. It's very NASA. It's very cutting edge. And that's different to the frugal element of the Amazon culture. And I'm not saying these few words represent all of the complexity and richness of culture there. And I'm sure it's very different if you're working in one room or one level or one job. But what I am saying is that that's a tool for a purpose. And I think if cultural specialists look at that and say, what does it achieve? What am I seeking to achieve with this? And strategists and planners and the executives say, but how does what I'm seeking to achieve, what does it require from a cultural point of view? And also, what does my culture allow me to do that I perhaps have not recognized? What creativity is in there, or what depth of commitment? And I'm turning people off, the very best thing about the culture. And if I could turn it back on, I mean, think of Toys R Us just dying, because nobody cared about it. Nobody cared about the people. Nobody paid the people. Nobody cleaned the stores. Nobody. I mean, it wasn't just debt. It was a mismatch of culture, the best place to play with your children, the strategy being those things, and then culture. This is the place to treat people badly when they come to work.
Yes. Yeah, it's so true. I love this idea of culture for purpose, and also this idea that this is the first meal of the day, and sort of getting them together to have that first meal. And as a shout out to some of the organizations that I work with, and I've seen this trend intensifying over the past couple of years, that more and more organizations, including startups in really early stage, they express an interest on aligning those two things almost from day one. And it certainly wasn't the case in the past at all. Culture was always an afterthought, and usually when things didn't go so well, it was, okay, how do we fix our culture now?
And you find that in, say, the Microsoft turnaround or the Apple stuff. I mean, these are only examples I'm using because they're well known. But what you find in most of those examples is that the CEO who turns that company around or helps did understand that those two things were needed to be, in your words, intimately connected. And that therefore that the empathy culture that the Microsoft CEO has gone for was a very useful antidote to the brusque, violent, aggressive culture that preceded it. And it was the best way of bringing goodwill from the people who work there, who could then be proud to say they worked there instead. And then I think it is, we've had a fabulous conversation for me. I've loved it. But I think also pointing out that for purpose, and that stop saying we need a strong culture. I mean, if somebody is saying that to you, somebody is giving you bad advice. They've misunderstood the nature of the problem and the solution. Strong. What? Strong? Yeah. Or even what you need is something that is adapted to your purpose or to your strategy, and also to the well-being of the people there. I believe in both. A highly adaptable strategy, culture. Look at how people adapt. Look at what doesn't adapt. Look at information flow, idea flow. Where do things get stuck? How do we keep feeding idea zombies in our culture rather than giving nurture and succor to idea babies and helping them become, proper shark babies or something like Shark Boy. You remember the movie? Shark Boy. How do we do that? Are we presenting enough examples of how this really works? In fact, Shark Boy comes to mind because it was the director of that film, the Spy Kids series and the Shark Boy film, and is it Magma Girl or something? It doesn't matter. But he did all that stuff at home on his computer because he wanted to be with his family. And so he created a whole way of creating this stuff that suited his purpose. And it still made a lot of money, and he still... So I suppose you have to creatively think how you innovate, you strategize, you create a culture to nurture ideas, to get you somewhere better, to produce the human sort of future that you wish.
I love that. I really, really agree with that and align with that 100%. And actually, I don't think that having, as you say, a strong culture or whatever sort of culture, that just for the sake of culture makes any sense at all. And I'm almost allergic when I have conversations with companies and they say, oh, we need to be more entrepreneurial, or we need to be more this and more that. And when you start talking about where does that come from and what are the signs, it's just an aspiration that ticks a box because you have a list of things that you have to be, and they often will feel that they tick the box, innovative or empathetic or whatever, but there is one more box to tick, which completely doesn't make sense to me.
Yes, it's isolated. It's good. Yeah. They talk about silos, but actually their values and value statements and create silos of activity because you're going to do the bit about the empathetic organization, and that's separate as a separate project and a separate work stream and all these corporate words. And so if you're in a corporate, just know that there is a better way of combining these things. Start with synthesized, connected, integrated ideas and views of the world, a holistic view of the world that is realistic, rather than starting with these thought-provoking, thought-leadery style books that only have one idea, because then you'll spend the rest of your career trying to integrate that because it was never an integrated idea.
Couldn't agree more. Max, I want us to shift gears a little bit and go to a section that I call rapid fire questions.
Okay.
I'll have 5 questions for you, and the challenge is that you'll try to answer them under 2 minutes. Or 5 of them. Okay? Okay, let's go for it. So the first one, how do you define organizational culture?
Organizational culture is, I think, as I said, the sum total of values, beliefs, assumptions, and traditions of an organization. There are differences in character, rhythm, preferences, jokes, discipline, and priorities. And though that taken together, that's culture. Human systems that come from human nature.
And what are the signs that a company culture needs some work, or perhaps even a major overhaul?
Well, in a sense, if you are not getting what you want, if your group of people are not succeeding in the world, then at the heart of that is the blend of culture and strategy. So if people are not passing on ideas, if people are saying that they're not listened to, if people are complaining about you on Glassdoor, if your customers are complaining about you, all of these are signs that the culture is not working, because the culture is what produces outcome. Strategy plus culture equals outcome.
Yes. And are there any companies that get the culture bit right and that you admire for the culture?
Yes, there are. I really like Schmuckers, the people who make peanut butter and jam sandwiches.
I don't know that brand.
No, well, they're an American brand, and I love them. They spent about 5 years perfecting the peanut butter and jam or jelly sandwich that could be put into a freezer, and then you can take it out and microwave it. And they wanted to get it just right, because this is an American specialty. And they had a culture that was dedicated to this purpose. And I love that. And they're mainly based in they're manufacturing in one town. And so the whole town is the culture. And there's even an ex-employee who has a statue of the founder, a huge gold statue he's built in his back garden, because he so loves the company and loves what it means to him. So that, I mean, in a sense, I have to say also, I mean, little and large companies, but all of those big companies have had some culture strategy match that has been, of course, wildly successful, or it could not have been. And it's trying to, sometimes even the people who work there don't know what the magic potion is. They only know that it's worked. But yeah, Schmuckers.
Yeah. Schmuckers, and I love peanut butter, so I certainly need to check them out for sure.
For breakfast, coffee.
Yes. What books on culture or leadership would you recommend to our listeners? Aside your books, we're going to post the links to all your books in the show notes. Where do you learn? What are the books that left a mark on you?
Okay. Well, I loved the Tom Peters book a long, long time ago. Where he's talking about thriving on chaos. I think that's a terrific book, because it's overlarge, it's packed with stuff, and I think was his very best work. I know that some time ago. I love the book Rules for Radicals, the Alinsky book, just terrific. I think that if somebody wants to get their head around culture, though, typically it depends the angle you're coming at it. If you really like dense, complex books, then you can actually go into almost philosophy and sociology and find far more that is of value than your typical page turner, because they teach you how humans work together.
I'm Aga Bajer, the creator and host of the Culture Lab podcast, and this is the Culture Lab team.
Anis El Labarawi, production manager.
Sound producer, Heather McPherson, Twisted Spur Media.
Thank you for joining us for this episode of the Culture Lab podcast. Max and I hope that it will inspire you to think broader and deeper about aligning culture and strategy. And if you'd like an opportunity to interact with the guests of the show in live sessions, where you can actually learn more on the topic, well, this is just one of many benefits you'd enjoy if you're a member of the CultureBrained community. CultureBrained is a one-of-a-kind global community for culture leaders who look for new ways of cultivating remarkable cultures in this brave new world of remote and hybrid work. If you're in charge of a culture-shaping project, and if you believe that work should be synonymous with fun, meaning, and belonging, well, I think you'd feel right at home in our community. It's a really diverse group of culture leaders, from Fortune 100 to tiny startups, and what brings us together is a passion for cultivating a healthy culture at scale. We are guided by our values of being bold, being kind, and being curious. And we'd love for you to join if it feels like the right fit for you. You can learn more at tiny.one/CultureBrained. You'll find the link in the show notes. Thanks for tuning in and listening to this episode of the Culture Lab podcast. If you found any moments that were interesting, inspiring, or maybe even game-changing, please share this episode with someone who'd appreciate it. After all, good ideas are meant to be shared. If you haven't subscribed to the Culture Lab yet, you can do it on any podcast streaming platform of your choice. If you want to receive our weekly insights on cultivating a remarkable, powerful, and authentic company culture, especially in a business that scales, type this into your browser: tinyurl.com/agabajer. That's tinyurl.com/AGABAJER. Also, we would be ever so grateful if you could rate and review our podcast on Apple Podcasts or wherever you listen to it. And finally, the entire Culture Lab team and our guests, we are going to continue exploring how we can make the word work synonymous with fun, meaning, and belonging, and how we can build remarkable cultures that scale as our businesses grow and the world keeps on changing. So, what do you want to hear about next? What matters to you? Email us at lindsay@agabajer.com and let us know.